An ordinary delivery rider knocked the wrong hotel door but was invited to dinner by a CEO. Marco Chen's hands trembled as he balanced 3 orders of steaming Thai food while checking his phone for the 100th time that evening. Room 1247. The numbers blurred together after 14 hours of racing between restaurants and hotel lobbies, apartment complexes and office buildings. His motorcycle had broken down twice today, forcing him to sprint across downtown on foot, while precious minutes ticked away on delivery timers. "Come on," he muttered, pressing the elevator button repeatedly. The Grandview Hotel's marble lobby intimidated him with its crystal chandeliers and guests who probably spent more on dinner than he made in a week. But money was money, and he needed every dollar he could scrape together. The elevator climbed to the 12th floor with agonizing slowness. Marco's stomach growled, reminding him that he'd skipped lunch again to squeeze in an extra delivery. His business textbooks sat unopened in his tiny studio apartment while he worked 16-hour days just to keep up with tuition payments. Sometimes he wondered if his dreams of owning his own company were just delusions of an exhausted mind. Room 1247. He knocked twice, shifting the heavy bags while trying to look professional, despite his sweat-stained uniform and helmet hair. The door opened to reveal a man in an expensive suit, mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The hotel room behind him looked like a luxury suite that cost more per night than Marco's monthly rent. "Thai Palace delivery," Marco said automatically, already reaching for the receipt. "That'll be $47.50. The man looked confused. "I didn't order Thai food." Marco's heart sank as he double-checked his phone. "Room 1247, right? Pad Thai green curry spring rolls. This is 1247, but I'm afraid there's been a mistake." "Oh God, I'm so sorry." Marco's voice cracked with exhaustion and embarrassment. "I must have mixed up the numbers. I'll figure out where this is supposed to go. Sorry to bother you, sir." He started to turn away, but the man's voice stopped him. "Wait, when's the last time you ate something?" The question was so unexpected that Marco turned back, blinking in confusion. "Sir, you look like you're about to collapse. When did you last have a real meal?" Marco wanted to lie to maintain some dignity, but the genuine concern in the man's voice broke down his defenses. "Yesterday morning, I think. Maybe the day before. It's been a long week." The man studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. "Why don't you come in? You can figure out where that food needs to go, and we can share it while you wait." "I can't do that, sir. I need to get this delivered, and I have 3 more orders after this." "5 minutes. Sit down, eat something, and then you can continue your deliveries with a clear head." Marco hesitated. Every minute of delay meant angry customers, bad reviews, reduced tips. But his legs were shaking from exhaustion, and the smell of the Thai food was making his stomach cramp with hunger. "I really shouldn't—" "I'm David Grant," the man said, extending his hand. "And I'm not taking no for an answer. When someone looks like they're running on empty, common decency says you help them refuel." Something in his tone was both authoritative and gentle. Marco found himself stepping into the suite, still clutching the delivery bags. "Marco Chen," he replied, shaking the offered hand. "And I promise I'll only stay a minute." "We'll see about that." The suite was even more impressive from the inside floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, elegant furniture that probably cost more than Marco's entire net worth, and a dining table that could seat 8 people comfortably. "Set the food down here?" David said, gesturing to the table. "What did you say was in those bags?" "Pad Thai with shrimp green curry with chicken vegetable spring rolls and jasmine rice." Marco carefully unpacked the containers, his delivery training kicking in, despite the surreal situation. "Sounds perfect. I was about to order room service anyway, and this smells infinitely better." David was already pulling out chairs. "Sit." "Mr. Grant, I really need to figure out who actually ordered this." "It can wait 5 minutes. Sit down and eat something before you pass out in my hotel room and create a liability issue." There was humor in his voice, but also an unmistakable authority that Marco recognized from his business classes. This was someone accustomed to being obeyed, but not in a harsh way. more like someone who simply expected reasonableness to prevail. Marco sat, and David immediately began serving food onto 2 plates he'd retrieved from somewhere in the suite. "So Marco Chen, tell me about yourself while we eat." "There's not much to tell, sir. I deliver food to pay for college. Business administration major at City University." "Business administration. What's your goal?" Marco took a bite of pad thai and nearly groaned with relief as real food hit his system. "Own my own company someday. Maybe logistics, maybe tech. Haven't decided yet." "What year are you?" "Junior. Should graduate next year if I can keep up with tuition payments." David nodded thoughtfully. "And how many hours a week do you work delivering food?" "Depends. Usually 60-70 hours. More during busy seasons." "That doesn't leave much time for studying." "I study between deliveries. Read textbooks while waiting for orders. It's not ideal, but it works." David was quiet for a moment, and Marco realized how pathetic his situation must sound to someone who could afford a suite like this. "I'm sorry," Marco said quickly. "You don't need to hear about my problems. Thank you for the meal, but I should really get going." "How long have you been doing this?" The question stopped Marco mid-rise from his chair. 2 years, since my dad got sick and couldn't work anymore." "What kind of sick?" Marco hesitated. He'd learned not to share too much personal information with strangers, but something about David Grant invited honesty. "Heart attack, then complications. He's stable now, but he can't do construction work anymore. Mom works at a grocery store, but it's not enough to cover his medical bills and my tuition and rent." "So you're supporting your family and putting yourself through college on delivery driver wages. Lots of people have it worse." Marco said automatically the response he always gave when people pointed out how difficult his life was. "That may be true, but it doesn't make your situation less challenging." David leaned back in his chair, studying Marco with those intelligent eyes. "What's your GPA?" 3.8. "Impressive, considering your schedule. What's your favorite class?" "Strategic management. Professor Williams makes everything come alive, you know. Shows how all the theory applies to real business situations." "Williams is still teaching. I had him 15 years ago. Brilliant man." Marco blinked. "You went to City University. MBA program. Long time ago?" David smiled. "Different circumstances than yours, though. My parents paid my way through school." "What do you do now?" "I run a tech company. Software development, mostly business applications." Marco's eyes widened. "That's what I want to do." "Well, maybe. I mean, I haven't decided exactly what kind of business, but tech seems like where all the opportunities are." "It can be, but it's also incredibly competitive. The barrier to entry is high, especially if you don't have connections or startup capital." "Yeah, I figured that out. That's why I'm trying to learn as much as I can in school, build up some savings, maybe get experience working for someone else first." "Smart approach, although with your schedule internships must be difficult." Marco laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Internships are for people who can afford to work for free. I can't take unpaid positions." "What about paid internships?" "Those go to people with better GPAs, better connections, better everything than me. I'm just trying to graduate and hope someone gives me a chance." David was quiet again, and Marco realized he'd been talking too much. Rich, successful people didn't want to hear sob stories from delivery drivers. "I should really figure out where this food was supposed to go," he said, pulling out his phone. "Before you do that, can I ask you something?" "Sure. If you could have any job right out of college, what would it be?" Marco considered the question seriously. "Something where I could learn the business from the ground up. Maybe junior management at a growing company somewhere. I could see how decisions get made and understand how all the pieces fit together." "Not interested in starting at the top." "Are you kidding? I don't know enough to start at the top. I need to earn my way up, learn from people who actually know what they're doing." David nodded approvingly. "That's refreshing. Most business students I meet want to skip the learning phase and jump straight to executive positions. Those people probably haven't spent 2 years delivering food to executives. You learn pretty quickly that there's a lot more to running a business than most people realize. Such as, everything's connected. The CEO might make the big decisions, but if the delivery systems break down, or customer service fails, or the technology glitches, none of those big decisions matter. You need people at every level who understand their role and care about doing it well. David leaned forward, clearly interested. Go on. Like I've delivered food to probably 100 different businesses. The successful ones you can tell immediately. Everyone's engaged, everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing, and they treat outside vendors with respect. The struggling companies, it's chaos. People don't communicate, nobody takes ownership of problems, and they treat service workers like we're invisible. You've learned all that from delivering food. You see a lot when people think you're not paying attention. Plus, I've read every business book I can get my hands on. Theory's important, but seeing it in action makes it real. David was nodding slowly, and Marco realized he'd been talking for 10 minutes straight. The Thai food containers were nearly empty, and he actually felt human again. Mr. Grant, thank you so much for this, but I really do need to… Marco. David's voice was serious now. I want to make you an offer. Marco's heart skipped. Sir, my company is looking for someone to join our management training program. It's a 2-year rotation through different departments' operations, sales, marketing, finance. You'd learn the business from every angle while finishing your degree part-time. Marco stared at him. Are you serious? Completely serious. 40,000 starting salary, full benefits, and tuition assistance for your remaining coursework. The numbers didn't compute. 40,000 was more than Marco made in a year and a half of deliveries. I don't understand. You don't know anything about me except that I deliver food and accidentally knocked on your door. I know you're working 70 hours a week while maintaining a 3.8 GPA. I know you're supporting your family while putting yourself through college. I know you have insights about business operations that most MBA graduates never develop. David leaned forward. And I know you're exactly the kind of person I want in my organization. Marco felt dizzy, and not from hunger this time. This can't be real. It's real, but I need an answer soon. The program starts in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Marco's mind raced. But what about my current job? My family depends on the income. Marco, 40,000 a year is significantly more than you're making now, even with overtime. You'd actually be able to support your family better while working normal hours. But why me? There must be hundreds of business students who are more qualified. Qualifications on paper are easy to find. Character isn't. David stood up and walked to the window. I've been looking for the right person for this position for 6 months. I've interviewed dozens of candidates with perfect GPAs and impressive resumes, but none of them had what I'm really looking for. Which is what? Grit. Real understanding of how businesses actually work. Humility combined with ambition. Someone who knows what it's like to work for every dollar and won't take success for granted. Marco felt tears threatening and blinked them back. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Come work for me. Learn everything I can teach you, and in 5 years, maybe you'll be ready to start that company you're dreaming about. The offer was everything Marco had hoped for, and more than he'd ever dared imagine. But it felt too good to be true, too easy after years of struggling. Can I think about it? Of course. But like I said, I need an answer soon. David pulled out his business card. Here's my information. Call me tomorrow with your decision. Marco took the card with shaking hands. David Grant, CEO, Innovate Solutions. A real business card from a real CEO offering him a real job. There's just one condition, David said as Marco headed for the door. Marco's heart sank. Here it comes, he thought. The catch that makes this impossible. What's that? You have to promise me that when you're successful, and you will be successful, you'll remember this moment. And when you meet someone who reminds you of yourself right now, someone who's working harder than anyone should have to work just to get by, you'll give them the same chance I'm giving you. Marco looked at this man who'd just changed his life with a single conversation, who'd seen potential where everyone else saw just another delivery driver. I promise, he said, meaning it completely. Good. Now go deliver that food to whoever actually ordered it, but call me tomorrow. As Marco walked back to the elevator, the delivery bags feeling weightless in his hands, he realized that sometimes the best things in life really do happen when you knock on the wrong door. Marco spent the entire night staring at David Grant's business card, turning it over in his hands like a talisman that might disappear if he held it too loosely. The elegant cardstock felt substantial, real, but the conversation itself seemed like something his exhausted mind might have invented. $40,000 a year. Benefits, tuition assistance, management training. He'd Googled Innovate Solutions on his phone, and everything checked out. David Grant was exactly who he claimed to be, CEO of a successful software company with over 200 employees and clients across 3 continents. The company had been featured in tech magazines, won awards for workplace culture, and had a reputation for promoting from within. It was legitimate, it was real, and it was being offered to a delivery driver who'd knocked on the wrong door. Marco's phone buzzed with another delivery request, but for the first time in 2 years he ignored it. Instead, he called his mother. "Mijo, you sound different," she said immediately. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom. Better than fine, actually. I need to tell you something." He explained the entire evening, the wrong room, the dinner invitation, the job offer that had come out of nowhere. His mother listened without interrupting a skill she'd developed during his father's illness, when good news was rare and had to be examined carefully. "This man, he seems trustworthy," she asked finally. "I think so. I researched his company. It's all legitimate." "And you would make enough to help with Papa's medical bills?" "More than enough. Mom, with this job, you could cut back your hours at the grocery store, maybe even quit if you wanted to." There was silence on the other end, and Marco knew his mother was crying. She'd worked 60-hour weeks for 2 years, her hands cracked from constant exposure to cleaning chemicals and cold storage. "What does your heart tell you, mijo?" It was the question she always asked when he faced difficult decisions. Not what logic suggested or what fear whispered, but what his deepest instincts said was right. "My heart says this is what I've been working toward. That maybe all those late nights and skipped meals and double shifts happened for a reason." "Then you know what you need to do." Marco called David at 8 a.m. sharp before he could lose his nerve. "I was hoping I'd hear from you early," David said, and Marco could hear the smile in his voice. "What's your answer?" "Yes, absolutely yes. When do I start?" "Next Monday. Come to the office at 9 a.m. and ask for Jennifer Walsh. She's our HR director. She'll handle all the paperwork and get you set up with your training schedule." "Mr. Grant, I just want to say thank you again. You have no idea how much this means." "Actually, I do. We'll talk more about that later. For now, focus on finishing strong with your current commitments and preparing for a new chapter." Marco spent the weekend in a daze working his final delivery shifts and trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. His co-workers at the Thai Palace restaurant were skeptical when he explained why he was quitting. "Nobody gets hired like that," insisted Jin, another driver. "Rich guys don't just hand out jobs to random people. There's got to be a catch." But Marco's supervisor, Mrs. Chen, who'd watched him work for 2 years, had a different perspective. "Some people recognize quality when they see it," she said, counting out his final paycheck. "You think this man got successful by missing opportunities? He saw something in you that maybe you don't even see in yourself yet." Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, but Marco had never felt more energetic. He'd bought his first business shirt from a thrift store, pressed his only pair of dress pants, and arrived at the Innovate Solutions office 15 minutes early. The building was sleek glass and steel, nothing like the cramped restaurants and apartment complexes he was used to navigating. The lobby buzzed with professional energy people in tailored suits talking into Bluetooth headsets, the soft hum of important business being conducted efficiently. Jennifer Walsh turned out to be a warm woman in her 50s who treated Marco's arrival like she'd been expecting him for months. "David speaks very highly of you," she said, leading him through a maze of open-concept workspaces. "He's particular about who he brings into the management program, so you should feel proud." "I still can't quite believe this is happening." "Believe it. David has an eye for talent, and his instincts are usually spot on." She paused at a desk near the windows. "This will be your workspace for the first rotation. You'll spend 6 months in operations learning how we deliver solutions to clients." Marco's new supervisor was Tom Rodriguez, a guy in his early 30s who'd started as an intern and worked his way up to department manager. "So you're David's latest discovery," Tom said with a grin. "Don't let it go to your head. but you should know that everyone he's personally recruited has gone on to do great things here. He's done this before. David has a theory that the best employees come from unexpected places. Our top sales director used to manage a coffee shop. Our head of marketing was a high school teacher. He looks for people who understand customer service and aren't afraid of hard work. The first week was overwhelming. Marco learned about project management software, client relationship protocols, and quality assurance processes. Everything was documented, systematic, professional in ways that his delivery job had never been. But more than the systems, he was struck by the culture. People collaborated instead of competing. Managers asked for input from junior employees. When problems arose, the focus was on solving them rather than assigning blame. It wasn't always like this, explained Sarah Kim, a project coordinator who'd been with the company for 5 years. David spent years building this environment deliberately. He believes that if you treat people well, give them opportunities to grow, and trust them with real responsibility, they'll surprise you with what they can accomplish. On Friday of his first week, David stopped by Marco's desk. "How's it going so far?" "Incredible. Overwhelming, but incredible." Marco gestured at his computer screen, which displayed a project tracking spreadsheet he'd been learning to navigate. "I'm starting to see how all the pieces fit together." "Good. Walk with me for a minute." They headed toward David's office, which occupied a corner of the building with panoramic city views. But instead of going inside, David led Marco to a small conference room. "I want to explain something about why I offered you this job," David said once they were seated. "Okay. 15 years ago I was you. Not exactly I had family money for college, so the financial pressure wasn't the same. But I was hungry, ambitious, and convinced I had to prove myself to everyone." Marco leaned forward, intrigued. "I got hired by a tech startup right out of school. Tiny company, maybe 20 employees, but the CEO took a chance on me, despite having no real experience. He became my mentor, taught me everything about running a business, and when he retired, he recommended me to take over the company. Innovate Solutions, the company that became Innovate Solutions. We've grown a lot since then." David smiled. "The point is, someone believed in me before I'd proven myself. Someone saw potential and decided to invest in it. And now you're doing the same thing?" "I'm trying to, but there's more to it than just paying it forward." David's expression grew serious. "Marco, I've been running this company for 8 years. We're successful, profitable, growing steadily. But I've learned that success isn't just about numbers." "What do you mean?" "The best companies aren't just about making money. They're about creating opportunities for people to become their best selves. When I hire someone like you, someone who's already demonstrated incredible work ethic and determination, I'm not just filling a position. I'm investing in human potential." Marco felt the weight of that investment settling on his shoulders. "What if I disappoint you? What if I'm not as capable as you think I am? Then we'll figure it out together. But I don't think that's going to happen." David stood up. "You know what impressed me most about our conversation last week?" "What?" "You didn't ask about advancement opportunities or salary negotiations or what perks came with the job. You asked about learning opportunities. You wanted to understand the business from the ground up. That tells me you're thinking long-term, and long-term thinking is what builds successful companies." As they walked back toward the main office, Marco realized he was experiencing something he'd never felt before: genuine optimism about his future. For 2 years, he'd been focused purely on survival, on getting through each day and each semester. Now, for the first time, he could envision a career trajectory that led somewhere meaningful. "Mr. Grant," "David, we're colleagues now." "David, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Do you ever regret not starting your own company from scratch, building something entirely your own, instead of taking over someone else's vision?" David considered the question seriously. "I thought about that a lot in my 20s, but I've come to realize that there are different ways to build something meaningful. Sometimes the most important thing you can build isn't a company, it's a culture, a team, a place where good people can do their best work." They'd reached Marco's desk, where Tom was waiting with a stack of client files. "Besides," David added with a smile, "who says you won't start your own company someday? This is just your first chapter, not your whole story." As David walked away, Marco sat down at his desk and looked around the office at his colleagues, focused on their projects at the wall displays, showing client testimonials and company achievements at the windows, overlooking a city full of possibilities. 6 months ago, he'd been working 70-hour weeks just to stay afloat. Now he was part of something bigger, learning from people who wanted him to succeed, building skills that would serve him for the rest of his career. And it had all started with knocking on the wrong door. 3 months into his rotation, Marco had found his rhythm at Innovate Solutions. The operations department had become familiar territory, and he'd developed a reputation for thorough analysis and creative problem-solving. More importantly, he'd begun to understand how David's leadership style worked. Unlike the distant authority figures he'd imagined CEOs to be, David was actively involved in the company's daily operations. He knew employees' names asked about their projects and made himself available for questions or concerns. But it wasn't micromanagement, it was genuine interest in helping people succeed. "Marco, do you have a few minutes?" David appeared at his desk one Tuesday afternoon, holding a tablet and looking slightly frustrated. "Of course, what's up?" "We've got a situation with the Patterson Industries account. They're threatening to terminate their contract because they claim our software isn't meeting their efficiency targets." Marco had heard about Patterson Industries, a mid-sized manufacturing company that had signed a significant deal 6 months earlier. Their account was worth nearly $500,000 annually. "What kind of efficiency problems are they reporting?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out. According to our metrics, the system is performing exactly as designed. Their productivity has increased by 18% since implementation, but they're saying it's not intuitive enough for their employees." They walked to David's office, where he pulled up the Patterson account on his computer. "Here's the thing," David continued. "I could send Tom or Sarah to handle this. They're both excellent at client relations. But I'm wondering if you might have a different perspective." "Me, but I don't have experience with account management." "No, but you have experience with systems that don't work well for the people who have to use them. You've worked in restaurants where the ordering system slowed everything down, delivered to offices where the building layout made no sense. Sometimes fresh eyes see problems that experts miss." Marco studied the account details, noting the timeline of complaints and the specific issues Patterson had raised. "Would it be possible for me to visit their facility, talk to the actual users, instead of just the decision-makers?" David raised an eyebrow. "What makes you think that would help?" "In my delivery jobs, I learned that the people at the top of organizations often have different perspectives than the people doing the daily work. Maybe Patterson's management thinks the system should work one way, but their employees need it to work differently." "Interesting theory. What would you say to them?" Marco thought carefully. "I'd ask them to show me their actual workflow, not the theoretical process we designed for them. I'd watch how they interact with the software during a real workday, see where the friction points actually are." David was nodding slowly. "That's exactly the kind of thinking I was hoping for. Tom, what's your take?" Tom had joined them during the conversation. "It's worth trying. We've been approaching this from a technical standpoint, but Marco's right, maybe we need to understand the human element better." "All right, Marco. Patterson Industries tomorrow morning. You'll observe their operations and report back with recommendations." That evening, Marco called his father to share the news. "They're sending you to represent the company." His dad asked, pride evident in his voice despite the phone connection. "Just to observe and learn. But yeah, it feels like a big responsibility. You'll do fine, mijo. You understand working people because you are working people. Don't let the fancy office make you forget that." The next morning, Marco drove to Patterson Industries, feeling nervous but excited. The facility was a sprawling warehouse complex where workers manufactured automotive parts for several major car companies. The production manager, Steve Walsh, greeted him with obvious skepticism. "You're the expert they sent. You look like you're barely out of college." "I am barely out of college," Marco replied honestly, "but I'm here to learn about your operation, not to lecture you about software." Something in his approach seemed to disarm Steve's defensiveness. "Well, that's refreshing. Usually when software companies send people, they spend the whole time explaining why we're using their system wrong." Steve led Marco through the facility, explaining the production process and showing him where employees interacted with the Innovate Solutions software. "See, here's the problem. Steve said, stopping at a workstation where a woman in her 50s was inputting data while simultaneously managing a complex assembly process. The software wants her to complete each entry before moving to the next step. But in our workflow, she needs to multitask, start an entry handle, a quality check, come back to finish the data move to the next station. Marco watched the woman work, noting how she'd developed workarounds to make the software fit her needs, rather than the other way around. "Maria, can I ask you something?" he said to the worker. "Sure, hun. If you could design the perfect system for this workstation, what would it look like?" Maria's eyes lit up. "Nobody's ever asked me that before, but I've got ideas." She spent 10 minutes explaining her ideal workflow, describing how information should be organized, and when she needed access to different functions. Her insights were detailed, practical, and completely different from the assumptions the software had been built on. Marco spent the entire day talking to frontline workers, watching their actual processes, and taking notes on the gaps between how the system was designed and how it needed to function. When he returned to the office that afternoon, he had 17 pages of observations and a clear understanding of what needed to change. "The software works perfectly," he told David and Tom. "But it's designed for efficiency experts, not for people who have to juggle multiple priorities while working under time pressure." "Explain." Marco pulled up the software interface on his laptop. "Look at this data entry screen. It requires users to complete each field sequentially before moving on. That makes sense from a data integrity standpoint, but it doesn't match how manufacturing workers actually think." He continued his analysis, explaining how small interface changes could dramatically improve user adoption and satisfaction. "The good news is that most of these are relatively simple fixes. We don't need to rebuild the system, we just need to make it more flexible." David was quiet for several minutes, reviewing Marco's notes. "This is excellent work," he said finally. "Tom, how quickly could we implement these changes? Maybe 2 weeks for the interface modifications, another week for testing." "Do it. Marco, I want you to present these findings to the Patterson team yourself." "Me, shouldn't you or Tom handle that?" "They trust you now. You listened to them, understood their problems, and came up with solutions. That relationship is valuable." 2 weeks later, Marco returned to Patterson Industries with a modified version of the software that incorporated the workers' suggestions. The difference was immediate tasks that had previously required multiple steps now flowed naturally, and the interface adapted to interruptions rather than fighting them. "This is exactly what we needed," Steve said, watching Maria navigate the new system with ease. "How did you figure this out when the other technical people couldn't?" "I asked different questions," Marco replied. "Instead of asking why the system wasn't working, I asked how it needed to work." The Patterson account was saved, and word spread quickly through Innovate Solutions about Marco's success. But more importantly to Marco, he'd discovered something about himself. He was good at bridging the gap between technical solutions and human needs. That evening, David stopped by his desk again. "Nice work on Patterson. I've been getting calls from other clients asking if you can review their implementations too." Really. Which brings me to something I've been thinking about." David sat down in the chair next to Marco's desk. "How would you feel about creating a new position for yourself?" Marco blinked. "What kind of position?" "Client success specialist. You'd work with our existing accounts to optimize their systems based on actual user feedback. Part consultant, part problem solver, part relationship manager." "That sounds amazing, but I've only been here 3 months. "And in 3 months, you've demonstrated exactly the skills this role requires. You understand technology, but more importantly, you understand people. You can communicate with executives and frontline workers equally well, and you're not afraid to challenge assumptions when they don't match reality." Marco felt the familiar flutter of opportunity mixed with self-doubt. "What about the management training program? I'm supposed to rotate through all the departments." "You still will, but we'll design rotations around this new role. You'll learn sales by working with client accounts, understand marketing by seeing how our solutions actually perform in the field, grasp finance by managing client profitability." It was more than Marco had dared hope for, not just a job, but a career path designed around his specific strengths and interests. "There's one more thing," David added. "This position comes with a promotion, $55,000 salary plus performance bonuses based on client retention and satisfaction." Marco stared at him. $55,000. The role creates real value for the company. It should be compensated accordingly. That night, Marco called his parents with the news. His mother cried. His father, still recovering but stable, laughed with joy. "I told you that man saw something special in you," his mother said. "Sometimes angels come disguised as businessmen." But as Marco lay in bed that night, he thought about David's earlier words about paying it forward. This wasn't just about his own success. It was about learning to recognize potential in others, about building something larger than personal achievement. Someday, when he was in a position to help, he would remember what it felt like to have someone believe in him before he'd proven himself. He would look for people working harder than they should have to work people with more determination than opportunity. And when he found them, he would do exactly what David Grant had done, open a door, and invite them to step into a bigger future. 6 months later, Marco had transformed the Client Success Program into one of Innovate Solutions' most valuable services. What had started as a reaction to the Patterson crisis had evolved into a systematic approach to optimizing software implementations across their entire client base. "We're getting referrals based solely on the client success work," Jennifer reported during the monthly management meeting. "Companies are signing with us specifically because they've heard about Marco's consultation process." Marco still felt slightly surreal sitting in these meetings, contributing to strategic discussions that would affect the entire company. But David had made it clear that his perspective was not just welcome, but essential. The question now, David said, is how we scale this success. Marco can't personally visit every client, and we're getting requests faster than one person can handle. "What if we trained other people to do similar work?" Marco suggested. "Created a whole team of client success specialists. Who would you hire?" Marco had been thinking about this for weeks. "People with service industry experience. Restaurant servers who understand customer needs, retail workers who've dealt with difficult situations, delivery drivers who've seen how different businesses actually operate." "Not business school graduates?" asked Tom, though he was smiling. "Maybe some, but not exclusively. The best insights come from people who've worked directly with customers under pressure. They understand the gap between theory and practice." David nodded approvingly. "Build me a hiring profile. What exactly would you look for in candidates?" Over the next month, Marco developed a recruiting strategy that prioritized attitude and customer service experience over traditional qualifications. When they posted the first 3 positions, they received over 200 applications. The candidate that impressed Marco most was Elena Rodriguez, a single mother who'd managed a busy restaurant while taking business courses at night. During her interview, she demonstrated exactly the kind of practical insight Marco had been looking for. "Software companies always design for perfect conditions," she said when Marco asked about her perspective on workplace technology. "But restaurants don't have perfect conditions. We have rushes and shortages and equipment failures and new employees who don't know the systems yet. Good technology has to work when things go wrong, not just when everything's running smoothly." Elena became Marco's first hire, and within a month she was generating the same kind of client enthusiasm that had made Marco's work so successful. "You've got a good eye for talent," David observed, watching Elena present optimization recommendations to a manufacturing client via video conference. "I'm looking for people who remind me of myself 6 months ago," Marco replied. "Hungry, hardworking, and tired of being underestimated." The success of the client program led to Marco's next challenge. David asked him to help redesign the entire company's hiring and promotion processes. "We've been successful hiring people with traditional backgrounds," David explained. "But our best innovations come from people who bring different perspectives. I want to systematize that approach." It was the kind of project Marco would have found intimidating a year earlier. Now he attacked it with the same methodical approach he'd used for client problems. He interviewed every employee about their background and career path analyzed which characteristics correlated with success in different roles and developed new interview processes that prioritized problem-solving ability over credentials. The pattern is clear. He reported to David after 2 months of research. Our highest-performing employees share certain traits: resilience, customer focus, and ability to learn quickly. But those traits aren't necessarily reflected in grades or previous job titles. What do you recommend? Structured interviews that simulate real-work situations, skills assessments that focus on thinking processes rather than existing knowledge, and reference checks that emphasize character over achievements. David implemented Marco's recommendations across all departments, and the quality of new hires improved dramatically. But more importantly to Marco, the company began attracting candidates who might never have considered applying to a tech company before. The new approach caught the attention of business media. Harvard Business Review published an article about Innovate Solutions, Unconventional Hiring Practices. Forbes featured Marco in a piece about rising stars who are reshaping corporate culture. "You're becoming famous," David said, showing Marco the latest article mention. Speaking requests, conference invitations, interview offers from other companies. Marco felt a moment of panic. "Other companies I'm not looking to leave. I didn't think you were. But you should know that your ideas about talent recognition and development are getting noticed. People want to learn from what you've built here." "What I've built here?" Marco shook his head. "David, I couldn't have built any of this without the opportunity you gave me, without your mentorship and support." "That's true, but what you've done with that opportunity is entirely your own achievement." David sat down across from Marco's desk. "I want to talk to you about something." "Okay. I've been thinking about succession planning. Not immediately, I'm not going anywhere soon. But eventually, this company will need new leadership, and I want to make sure we develop the right people for those roles." Marco felt his heart rate increase. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you're interested, I'd like to start preparing you for executive responsibility. Vice President of Operations with a path toward Chief Operating Officer within 3 years. The offer was staggering. 18 months ago, Marco had been delivering Thai food and wondering if he'd ever finish college. Now David was talking about preparing him for executive leadership. "I don't know if I'm ready for that level of responsibility." "Nobody ever feels ready. The question is whether you're willing to grow into it." David leaned forward. "Marco, you've demonstrated every quality I look for in leadership. You understand operations from the ground up. You can communicate with people at every level of an organization. You're innovative without being reckless, ambitious without being selfish. What about my degree? I still have 6 months of coursework left." "We'll work around it. The company will cover your remaining tuition, and you can arrange your class schedule around your responsibilities here." Marco thought about his parents who'd sacrificed so much to support his education. His father was healthy enough now to work part-time, and his mother had been able to reduce her hours at the grocery store. The financial security Marco had brought to their family was already beyond their wildest hopes. But this opportunity was about more than money. It was about the chance to shape an organization to create opportunities for other people to build something meaningful. "If I accept this, I want to do something," Marco said finally. "What's that?" "I want to create a formal mentorship program, not just for management training, but for people who are where I was 18 months ago, working multiple jobs, struggling to afford education, convinced that success isn't available to people like them." David smiled. "Tell me more." "Partner with local colleges and community organizations. Identify promising candidates who need opportunities more than they need credentials. Bring them in as paid interns. Give them real responsibilities. Show them that companies like this can be places where their potential gets recognized." "A pipeline for unconventional talent." "Exactly. And not just for our company, create a model that other organizations can replicate." David was quiet for several minutes, and Marco wondered if he'd overreached. "You know what I like most about that idea?" David said finally. "What?" "It's bigger than either of us. It's about creating systemic change, not just individual success stories." They spent the next hour outlining the mentorship program, discussing partnerships with local schools and community organizations, planning how to measure success, and replicate effective practices. When Marco finally left the office that evening, he walked past the hotel where he'd delivered Thai food that night so many months ago. The same doorman was working, the same luxury cars were pulling up to the entrance. But everything else had changed. Marco was no longer the exhausted delivery driver looking up at the windows of success from the outside. He was inside now, not just as an observer, but as someone with the power to open doors for others. He pulled out his phone and called David. "Change your mind about something," David answered. "No, I just wanted to say yes, officially. To the promotion, to the mentorship program, to all of it. I'm glad. You're going to do great things, Marco." As Marco walked home to his new apartment, still modest but in a safe neighborhood where his parents could visit comfortably, he thought about the promise he'd made that first night. To remember this feeling, to look for people who reminded him of his younger self, to give others the same chance David had given him. The program was just the beginning. Someday when he had his own company or led his own organization, he would build something even bigger, a place where potential mattered more than pedigree, where hard work and character opened doors that traditional credentials never could. And it would all trace back to one moment of mistaken delivery, one act of unexpected kindness, one man who chose to see possibility where others saw just another service worker. 2 years later, the Innovate Solutions Mentorship Program had become a model for companies across the country. Marco, now Chief Operating Officer, stood before a conference room full of business leaders from Fortune 500 companies, explaining how unconventional hiring practices had revolutionized their organization. "The results speak for themselves," he said, clicking to a slide showing retention and performance metrics. Program participants have a 94% retention rate after 2 years, compared to 67% for traditional hires. Their customer satisfaction scores are consistently higher, and their promotion rate exceeds company averages by 40%. In the audience, he spotted several faces. He recognized CEOs and HR directors who'd been skeptical when he first started speaking about these ideas. Now they were taking notes, asking detailed questions about implementation. But the face that mattered most to him was David's, sitting in the back row with the proud smile of a mentor watching his protege succeed. After the presentation, Marco was surrounded by business cards and requests for consultation. The program had generated enough interest that he was considering writing a book about talent development and organizational culture. "Impressive work," said a woman who introduced herself as Margaret Chen, CEO of a major retail chain. "But I have to ask, how do you scale something this personal? How do you maintain the individual attention that makes it successful?" It was the question Marco had been wrestling with for months. The program's success had created demand far beyond what one company could handle. "We're actually piloting a new approach," he replied. "Instead of trying to scale the program itself, we're training other companies to implement similar systems, teaching the principles rather than trying to manage every implementation." "Like franchising the methodology." "Exactly. But with a focus on adaptation rather than replication. Every organization has different needs, different culture, different challenges. The key is teaching the underlying philosophy and letting each company customize the approach." After the conference, David and Marco drove back to the office together. "That was your best presentation yet," David said. "You've really found your voice as a thought leader. It's surreal sometimes. 2 years ago, I was worried about making rent. Now people are asking me to consult on organizational strategy. Success often feels surreal to people who've worked for it. It's the people who expect success who take it for granted." They'd reached the office, but neither made a move to get out of the car. These conversations with David had become precious to Marco, moments of reflection that helped him process the rapid changes in his life. "I got an offer yesterday," Marco said finally. "Stanford Business School wants me to teach a course on alternative talent development, adjunct professor position." "That's fantastic. Are you interested?" "I think so, but I'm nervous about the time commitment and I don't want to shortchange my responsibilities here." David was quiet for a moment. "Marco, can I give you some advice?" "Always." "Don't make the mistake I almost made when I was your age. Don't get so focused on building one thing that you miss opportunities to create broader impact. What do you mean? When my mentor offered to help me take over this company, I almost said no. I thought I should start something completely new, build everything from scratch. But he helped me understand that sometimes the most important thing you can do is take something good and make it better, then use that platform to create opportunities for others. Marco nodded, understanding the parallel. Teaching at Stanford would give you a platform to influence how future business leaders think about talent and opportunity. That could create ripple effects far beyond what any single company can achieve. You think I should accept? I think you should do whatever feels aligned with your larger purpose. What's the impact you want to have on the world? It was a question Marco had been asking himself more frequently as his influence grew. The individual success was gratifying, but what really excited him was the possibility of systemic change. I want to prove that talent exists everywhere, but opportunity doesn't. I want to create pathways for people who've been overlooked by traditional systems. I want to change how organizations think about human potential. Then Stanford sounds like exactly the right opportunity. That evening, Marco called Elena, who was now managing her own team of client success specialists. "Congratulations, Professor Chen," she said when he told her about the Stanford offer. "When do you start?" "Fall semester if I accept. But I wanted to run something by you first." "What's that?" "How would you feel about taking over the mentorship program?" "Full ownership, your own budget, direct report to David." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Marco, are you serious?" "Completely serious. You understand the program better than anyone except me. You've got the vision and the skills to take it to the next level. And honestly, it needs someone who can give it full attention." But I don't have an MBA. I don't have the credentials for that kind of leadership role." Marco laughed. Elena, credentials are exactly what this program was designed to overcome. You have something more valuable, you understand what it's like to be underestimated, and you know how to help people exceed everyone's expectations. Over the next month, they worked together to transition leadership of the program. Elena brought her own innovations, partnerships with community colleges, a focus on supporting working parents, and assessment methods that identified potential in non-traditional ways. "You're a natural at this," Marco observed, watching her present program updates to the executive team. "I learned from the best," she replied. "But more importantly, I learned that someone believing in you changes everything about what you think is possible." The Stanford teaching position started in September, and Marco found himself energized by working with MBA students who were hungry to understand how business could create positive social impact. "Traditional recruiting focuses on minimizing risk," he explained during his first lecture. "We hire people with proven track records, established credentials, predictable performance patterns. But innovation comes from people who think differently, who bring perspectives we haven't considered." One student raised her hand. "But how do you evaluate potential when someone doesn't have a track record? How do you distinguish between diamonds in the rough and just rough?" Great question. It starts with changing what you look for. Instead of asking, "What have you achieved?" ask, "How do you respond to challenges?" Instead of, "Where did you go to school?" ask, "How do you learn new things?" He told them about his own story, the delivery job, the wrong door, the opportunity that changed everything. But he also talked about Elena, about the dozens of other program participants who'd exceeded expectations when given chances. The key insight is that most human potential is underdeveloped, not absent. People who've had to work for everything they've achieved often have skills that people who've had advantages never develop. After class, several students approached him with questions about implementing similar programs at their future employers. "Professor Chen," said one young woman, "I work part-time at a restaurant to pay for school. My manager there is incredibly smart and hard-working, but she doesn't think she could ever work in corporate business. How would I even begin to help her see those possibilities?" Marco smiled, remembering his own doubts about whether he belonged in corporate environments. "Start by asking her opinion about business challenges. Show her that her insights from managing restaurant operations are directly relevant to corporate problems. Help her see that the skills she uses every day, managing people handling pressure-solving problems with limited resources, are exactly what successful businesses need. These conversations reminded Marco why he'd accepted the teaching position. Each student who understood these principles would go on to influence hiring and development decisions at other organizations. The ripple effects could extend far beyond what any single company program could achieve. 6 months into his teaching role, Marco received a call that brought his journey full circle. "Is this Professor Chen?" asked a familiar voice. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Jin. Jin Park. We used to work together delivering food for Thai Palace." Marco's heart skipped. Jin had been one of the drivers who'd been skeptical about Marco's job opportunity with David. "Jin, how are you? How did you find me? I saw you on the news talking about that mentorship program. Man, I owe you an apology. I said there had to be a catch, that nobody gets hired like that." "You don't owe me anything. What's going on?" "I'm finishing my accounting degree next month. Been working nights and going to school during the day just like you were doing. But I keep thinking about what you said about looking for opportunities instead of just jobs." Marco felt a familiar excitement. "What are you thinking? Do you think someone like me could apply for that program at your company? I know it's probably a long shot, but..." "Jin, send me your resume, and be ready for an interview next week." "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. Elena Rodriguez is running the program now. She's fantastic. But I'll make sure she knows to expect your application." After hanging up, Marco sat in his Stanford office, looking out at the campus where future business leaders were being trained. Some of them would go on to run major corporations, make decisions that affected thousands of employees, shape how organizations thought about human potential. And some of them would remember a lecture about a delivery driver who knocked on the wrong door and found a mentor who changed his life. They would look for their own Jin Parks, their own overlooked talents, who just needed someone to recognize their potential. That evening, Marco called David to tell him about Jin's call. "Full circle," David observed. "How does it feel?" "Like the best kind of responsibility. Like everything that's happened was preparation for this moment." "What moment?" "The moment when I stop being the person who got lucky and become the person who creates luck for others." David was quiet for a moment. "You know, Marco, when I offered you that job, I thought I was just solving a staffing problem and helping one deserving person. I had no idea I was setting in motion something this significant. Neither did I. But maybe that's how the best things happen, when people focus on doing the right thing in the moment without worrying about the bigger picture." As Marco drove home that night, he thought about the speech he'd been asked to give at next month's graduation ceremony for the mentorship program participants. 23 people would be completing the program, moving into permanent positions throughout the company. Each had a story of overcoming obstacles, of potential recognized and developed, of lives transformed through opportunity. But more importantly, each would carry forward the understanding that talent exists everywhere, that everyone deserves a chance to prove their worth, that the best business decisions are often the most human decisions. The speech was easy to write because it was really just one story told 23 different ways, the story of what happens when someone knocks on the wrong door and finds exactly the right person waiting on the other side. 5 years after that first mistaken delivery, Marco stood in the conference room of his own consulting firm, looking at a wall covered with success stories. Photos of program participants who'd gone on to leadership roles, letters from companies that had implemented similar initiatives, articles documenting the growing movement toward inclusive hiring practices. "The Patterson Industries case study is ready for your review," said his business partner Sarah Kim, who'd left Innovate Solutions to help Marco launch Chen & Associates. "Their productivity has increased 47% since implementing our recommendations." Marco nodded, still amazed at how far they'd come. The consulting firm specialized in helping organizations identify and develop unconventional talent, and demand for their services had grown beyond anything he'd imagined. Any word from the publisher about the book proposal? "They love it. The Wrong Door: How Recognizing Hidden Talent Transforms Organizations will be published next spring. The book represented Marco's attempt to codify everything he'd learned about talent development mentorship and organizational culture. But more than a business guide, it was a collection of stories, people whose lives had been changed by someone willing to look beyond credentials and see potential. Marco. His assistant appeared in the doorway. "David Grant is here for your lunch meeting." David walked in carrying a familiar Thai Palace takeout bag, grinning at Marco's surprised expression. "I thought we should commemorate the anniversary appropriately," he said, setting the food on the conference table. "You actually went to Thai Palace." "I did. Mrs. Chen remembers you fondly. She says 3 of her former drivers have gotten professional jobs through programs inspired by your story." They sat down to share pad thai and green curry, just as they had that first night in David's hotel suite. "So what's the next chapter?" David asked. "The consulting firm is successful, the book is coming out. Stanford wants to make your position permanent. What's Marco Chen's 5-year plan?" Marco had been thinking about this question for months. Success had brought opportunities he'd never anticipated, but also responsibility to use his platform wisely. "I want to create something bigger than individual programs or companies," he said finally. "A foundation that partners with organizations across industries to systematically change how we think about talent and potential." "Tell me more." "Right now, what we're doing is still exceptional. Companies implement these programs because they're innovative and forward-thinking. But I want this approach to become standard practice, the default way organizations hire and develop people." David leaned back in his chair, considering the scope of what Marco was proposing. That would require changing not just corporate practices, but educational systems, professional development standards, maybe even social attitudes about success and merit. "Exactly. It's a generational project, not something that happens in a few years." "What would you need to make it work?" Marco pulled out a folder he'd been preparing for weeks. "Partnerships with major universities to change how business schools teach talent development. Collaborations with government agencies to modify hiring practices in public sector. Research initiatives to document the economic benefits of inclusive hiring." Ambitious. Maybe too ambitious. But I keep thinking about all the people who are still where I was 5 years ago, working multiple jobs, convinced that success isn't meant for people like them, never getting the chance to show what they're capable of. David was quiet for several minutes, reviewing Marco's preliminary plans. "You know what this reminds me of?" he said finally. "What?" "The conversation we had that first night when you talked about wanting to own your own company someday. You said you wanted to learn the business from the ground up, understand how all the pieces fit together." Marco nodded, remembering his naive certainty that he needed years of preparation before he could lead anything significant. Turns out the best preparation for changing the world isn't learning how things currently work, it's understanding why they need to change. That afternoon, Marco drove to his parents' house for their weekly dinner. His father had fully recovered and was working as a supervisor for a construction company that had implemented inclusive hiring practices. His mother had started taking business courses at the community college, inspired by watching Marco's career develop. "Mijo," she said as they sat down to eat. "I saw the article in the newspaper about your consulting company. They called you a thought leader in organizational development." Marco smiled. "It's still weird seeing my name in print like that." "Are you happy?" his father asked. "Really happy, not just successful." It was the question his parents always asked, the one that cut through accomplishments and accolades to what actually mattered. "I am Papa. I'm doing work that feels meaningful, helping people who remind me of myself, building something that could make a real difference." "Then we're proud of you. Not because you're successful, but because you're using your success to help others." After dinner, Marco sat on his parents' front porch, looking at the neighborhood where he'd grown up. Most of the houses needed repair, many families struggled economically, and opportunities for advancement were scarce. But he also saw potential everywhere: kids who were natural leaders, adults with entrepreneurial instincts, people who'd developed remarkable resilience and creativity in the face of challenges. The foundation he was planning would start here in communities like this one, identifying and nurturing talent that traditional systems overlooked. His phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Just got word that the program graduate retention rate is now 97%. Whatever you started is working." Marco smiled, remembering David's words about creating ripple effects. The program at Innovate Solutions had inspired similar initiatives at dozens of other companies. The Stanford students he'd taught were implementing inclusive hiring practices at their new employers. The consulting firm's clients were becoming advocates for systemic change. Each success story created new opportunities for others. Each opened door led to more doors opening. But the story that mattered most to Marco was still being written, the story of transforming how society recognizes and develops human potential, of creating a world where everyone gets the chance he'd been given that night when he knocked on the wrong door. As he drove home, Marco passed the Grandview Hotel where his journey had begun. The same luxury cars were pulling up to the entrance, the same doorman was greeting guests with polished professionalism. But Marco no longer saw it as a symbol of a world he could never access. Now he saw it as a reminder that the most extraordinary opportunities often come disguised as ordinary moments, that the most important doors are usually the ones we open by accident. And sometimes when we're brave enough to step through those doors, we discover that what we thought was a mistake was actually destiny arriving right on schedule. The delivery that had changed his life was complete, but the story it had started was just beginning. In conference rooms and classrooms, in hiring decisions and mentorship conversations, in the lives of people who would never know his name, but would benefit from the changes he'd helped create, Marco's accidental encounter with David Grant continued to generate new possibilities. The wrong door had led to exactly the right life. And that life was dedicated to ensuring that everyone got the chance to discover what doors might open when someone believes in their potential.